Chapter 6, The Doctrine of No Soul, Anatta. What in general is suggested by soul, self, ego, or to use the Sanskrit expression Atman, is that in man there is a permanent, everlasting, and absolute entity, which is the unchanging substance behind the changing phenomenal world. According to some religions, each individual has such a separate soul which is created by God and which finally, after death, lives eternally either in hell or heaven, its destiny depending on the judgment of its creator. According to others, it goes through many lives till it is completely purified and becomes finally united with God or Brahman, universal soul, or Atman, from which it originally emanated. This soul or self in man is the thinker of thoughts, feeler of sensations, and receiver of rewards and punishments for all its actions, good and bad. Such a conception is called the idea of self. Buddhism stands unique in history of human thought in denying the existence of such a soul, self, or Atman. According to the teaching of the Buddha, the idea of self is an imaginary false belief which has no corresponding reality, and it produces harmful thoughts of me and mine, selfish desire, craving, attachment, hatred, ill will, conceit, pride, egoism, and other defilements, impurities, and problems. It is the source of all the troubles in the world, from personal conflicts to wars between nations. In short, to this false view can be traced all the evil in the world. Two ideas are psychologically deep-rooted in man: self-protection and self-preservation. For self-protection, man has created God, on whom he depends for his own protection, safety, and security, just as a child depends on its parents. For self-preservation, man has conceived the idea of an immortal soul or Atman, which will live eternally. In his ignorance, weakness, fear, and desire, man needs these two things to console himself. Hence he clings to them deeply and fanatically. The Buddhist teaching does not support this ignorance, weakness, fear, and desire, but aims at making man enlightened by removing and destroying them, striking at their very root. According to Buddhism, our ideas of God and soul are false and empty. Though highly developed as theories, they are all the same extremely subtle mental projections, garbed in an intricate metaphysical and philosophical phraseology. These ideas are so deep-rooted in man and are so near and dear to him that he does not wish to hear nor does not want to understand any teaching against them. The Buddha knew this quite well. In fact, he said that his teaching was against the current, Patisottagami, against man's selfish desires. Just 4 weeks after his enlightenment, seated under the banyan tree, he thought to himself, "I have realized this truth, which is deep, difficult to see, difficult to understand, comprehensible only by the wise. Men who are overpowered by passions and surrounded by a mass of darkness cannot see this truth, which is against the current, which is lofty, deep, subtle, and hard to comprehend." With these thoughts in his mind, the Buddha hesitated for a moment, whether it would not be in vain if he tried to explain the world the truth he had just realized. Then he compared the world to a lotus pond. In a lotus pond there are some lotuses still under water. There are others which have risen only to the water level. There are still others which stand above the water and are untouched by it. In the same way, in this world, there are men at different levels of development. Some would understand the truth, so the Buddha decided to teach it. The doctrines of anatta, or no self, is the natural result of, or the corollary to, the analysis of the five aggregates and the teaching of the conditioned genesis, paticca samuppada. We have seen earlier in the discussion of the first noble truth, dukkha, that we call a being or individual, that what we call a being or individual is composed of the five aggregates, and that when these are composed and examined, there is nothing behind them which can be taken as I, Atman, or self, or any unchanging abiding substance. That is the analytical method. The same result is arrived at through the doctrine of conditioned genesis, which is the synthetical method, and according to this, nothing in the world is absolute. Everything is conditioned, relative, and interdependent. This is the Buddhist theory of relativity. Before we go into the question of anatta proper, it is useful to have a brief idea of the conditioned genesis. The principle of this doctrine is given in a short formula of 4 lines. When this is, that is, imasmin sati idam hoti, this arising, that arises. Imasupada idam upajati, when this is not, that is not. Imasmin asati idam nahoti, this ceasing, that ceases. Imasa nirodha idam nirujati. On the principle of conditionality, relativity, and interdependence, the whole existence and continuity of life and its cessation are explained in a detailed formula which is called paticca samuppada, conditioned genesis, consisting of 12 factors. 1. Through ignorance are conditioned volitional actions or karma formations. Ajiva pachaya samkara. Through volitional actions is conditioned consciousness. Samkara pachaya vijnanam. Through consciousness are conditioned mental and physical phenomenon. Vijnana pachaya namarupam. Through mental and physical phenomenon are conditioned the 6 faculties, i.e. 5 physical sense organs and mind. Namarupa pachaya salayatanam. Through the 6 faculties is conditioned sensorial and mental contact. Salayatana pachaya vaso. Through sensorial and mental contact is conditioned sensation. Vasa pachaya vedana. Through sensation is conditioned desire, thirst. Vedana pachaya tanha. Through desire, thirst is conditioned clinging. Tanha pachaya upadanam. Through clinging is conditioned the process of becoming. Upadana pachaya bhavo. Through the process of becoming is conditioned birth. Bhava pachaya jati. Through birth are conditioned decay, death, lamentation, pain, etc. Jata pachaya jaramaranam. This is how life arises, exists, and continues. If we take this formula in its reverse order, we come to the cessation of the process. Through the complete cessation of ignorance, volitional activities, or karma formations cease. Through the cessation of volitional activities, consciousness ceases. Through the cessation of birth, decay, death, sorrow, etc. cease. It should be clearly remembered that each of these factors is conditioned. Paticca samuppanna, as well as conditioning paticca samuppada. Therefore they are relative, interdependent, and interconnected, and nothing is absolute or independent. Hence no first cause is accepted by Buddhism, as we have seen earlier. Conditioned genesis should be considered as a circle, and not as a chain. The question of free will has occupied an important place in Western thought and philosophy, but according to conditioned genesis, this question does not and cannot arise in Buddhist philosophy. If the whole of existence is relative, conditioned, and interdependent, how can will alone be free? Will, like any other thought, is conditioned. So-called conditioned, or so-called freedom itself is conditioned and relative. Such a conditioned and relative free will is not denied. There can be nothing absolutely free, physical or mental, as everything is interdependent and relative. If free will implies a will independent of conditions, independent of cause and effect, such a thing does not exist. How can a will, or anything for that matter, arise without conditions, away from cause and effect, when the whole of existence is conditioned and relative, and is within the law of cause and effect? Here again, the idea of free will is basically connected with the ideas of God, soul, justice, reward, and punishment. Not only is so-called free will not free, but even the very idea of free will is not free from conditions. According to the doctrine of conditioned genesis, as well as according to the analysis of being into 5 aggregates, the idea of an abiding immortal substance in man or outside, whether it is called Atman, I, soul, self, or ego, is considered only a false belief, a mental projection. This is the Buddhist doctrine of anatta, no self, no soul, or no self. In order to avoid a confusion, it should be mentioned here that there are 2 kinds of truths: conventional truth, sammuti satcha, and ultimate truth, paramatta satcha. When we use such expressions in our daily life as I, you, being, individual, etc., we do not lie, because there is no self or being as such, but we speak a truth conforming to the convention of the world. But the ultimate truth is that there is no I or being in reality. As in the Mahayana Sutra Lankara says, a person, Pudgala, should be mentioned as existing only in designation, prajnati, i.e. conventionally there is a being, but not in reality or substance, dravya. The negation of an imperishable Atman is the common characteristic of all dogmatic systems of the lesser as well as the great vehicle, and there is therefore no reason to assume that Buddhist tradition, which is in complete agreement on this point, has deviated from the Buddha's original teaching. It is therefore curious that recently there should have been a vain attempt by a few scholars to smuggle the idea of self into the teaching of the Buddha, quite contrary to the spirit of Buddhism. These scholars respect, admire, and venerate the Buddha as his teaching. They look up to Buddhism, but they cannot imagine that the Buddha, whom they consider the most clear and profound thinker, could have denied the existence of an Atman or self which they need so much. They unconsciously seek the support of the Buddha for this need for external existence. Of course, not in a petty individual self with small s, but in the big self with a capital S. It is better to say frankly that one believes in an Atman or self. Or one may even say that the Buddha was totally wrong in denying the existence of an Atman, but certainly it will not do for anyone to try to introduce into Buddhism an idea which the Buddha never accepted, as far as we can see from the extent of original texts. Religions which believe in God and soul make no secret of these two ideas. On the contrary, they proclaim them constantly and repeatedly in the most eloquent terms. If the Buddha had accepted these two ideas, so important in all religions, he certainly would have declared them publicly, as he had spoken about other things, and would not have left them hidden to be discovered only 25 centuries after his death. People become nervous at the idea that through the Buddha's teaching of Anatman, the self they imagine they have is going to be destroyed. The Buddha was not unaware of this. A bhikkhu once asked him, "Sir, is there a case where one is tormented when something permanent within oneself is not found?" "Yes, bhikkhu, there is," answered the Buddha. A man has the following view: the universe is that Atman. I shall be that after death, permanent, abiding, everlasting, unchanging, and I shall exist as such for eternity. He hears the Tathagata, or a disciple of his, preaching the doctrine, aiming at the complete destruction of all speculative views, aiming at the extinction of thirst, aiming at detachment, cessation, nirvana. Then that man thinks, I will be annihilated, I will be destroyed, I will be no more. So he mourns, worries himself, laments, weeps, beating his breast, and becomes bewildered. Thus, O bhikkhu, there is a case where one is tormented when something permanent within oneself is found. Elsewhere the Buddha says, O bhikkhus, this idea that I may not be, I may not have, is frightening to the uninstructed worldling. Those who want to find a self in Buddhism argue as follows. It is true that the Buddha analyzes being into matter, sensation, perception, mental formations, consciousness, and says that none of these things is self. But he does not say that there is no self at all in man or anything else apart from these aggregates. This position is untenable for two reasons. One is that according to the Buddha's teaching, a being is composed only of these five aggregates and nothing more. Nowhere has he said that there was anything more than these five aggregates in a being. The second reason is that the Buddha denied categorically in unequivocal terms in more than one place the existence of Atman, soul, self, or ego within man or without, or anywhere else in the universe. Let us take some examples. In the Dhammapada, there are 3 verses extremely important and essential in the Buddha's teachings. They are numbers 5, 6, and 7 of chapter 20, or verses 227, 278, and 279. The first 2 verses say, all conditioned things are impermanent. Sabbe samkhara anicca. All conditioned things are dukkha. Sabbe samkhara dukkha. The 3rd verse says, all dhammas are without self. Sabbe dhamma anatta. Here it should be carefully observed that in the first 2 verses, the the word samkara, conditioned things, is used, but in its place in the third verse, the word Dhamma is used. Why didn't the third verse use the word samkara, conditioned things, as the previous two verses? And why did it use the term Dhamma instead? Here lies the crux of the whole matter. The term samkara denotes the five aggregates, all conditioned, interdependent, relative things and states, both physical and mental. If the third verse said, all samkara, conditioned things, are without self, then one might think, although conditioned things are without self, yet there may be a self outside conditioned things, outside the five aggregates. It is in order to avoid misunderstanding that the term Dhamma is used in the third verse. The term Dhamma is much wider than samkara. There is no term in Buddhist terminology wider than Dhamma. It includes not only the conditioned things and states, but also the non-conditioned, the absolute nirvana. There is nothing in the universe or outside, good or bad, conditioned or non-conditioned, relative or absolute, which is not included in this term. Therefore, it is quite clear that according to this statement, all Dhammas are without self. There is no self, no Atman, not only in the five aggregates, but nowhere else too outside them or apart from them. This means, according to the Theravada teaching, that there is no self either in the individual, Puggala, or in Dhammas. The Mahayana Buddhist philosophy maintains exactly the same position without the slightest difference on this point, putting emphasis on Dharma Naratyama as well as on Puggala Naratmaya. In the Alagadupama Sutta of the Majjhima Nikaya, addressing his disciples, the Buddha said, O bhikkhus, accept a soul theory, Attavada, in the acceptance of which there would not arise grief, lamentation, suffering, distress, and tribulation. But do you see, O bhikkhus, such a soul theory in the acceptance of which there would not arise grief, lamentation, suffering, distress, and tribulation? Certainly not, sir. Good, O bhikkhus. I too, O bhikkhus, do not see a soul theory in the acceptance of which there would not arise grief, lamentation, suffering, distress, and tribulation. If there had been any soul theory which the Buddha had accepted, he would certainly have explained it here, because he asked the bhikkhus to accept that soul theory which did not produce suffering. But in the Buddha's view, there is no such soul theory, and any soul theory, whatever it may be, however subtle and sublime, is false and imaginary, creating all kinds of problems, producing in its train grief, lamentation, suffering, distress, tribulation, and trouble. Continuing the discourse, the Buddha said in the same sutta, O bhikkhus, when neither self nor anything pertaining to self can truly and really be found, this speculative view, the universe is that Atman, soul, I shall be that after death, permanent, abiding, everlasting, unchanging, and I shall exist as such for eternity. Is it not wholly and completely foolish? Here the Buddha explicitly states that Atman, or soul, or self, is nowhere to be found in reality, and it is foolish to believe that there is such a thing. Those who seek a self in the Buddha's teaching quote a few examples which they first translate wrongly and then misinterpret. One of them is the well-known line, Atta hi atano nato, from the Dhammapada, which is translated as self is the Lord of self, and then interpreted to mean the big self is the Lord of the small self. First of all, this translation is incorrect. Atta here does not mean self in the sense of soul. In Pali, the word atta is generally used as a reflexive or indefinite pronoun, except in a few cases where it specifically and philosophically refers to the soul theory, as we have seen above. But in general usage, as in the seventh chapter in the Dhammapada, where the line occurs, and in many other places, it is used as a reflexive or indefinite pronoun, meaning myself, yourself, himself, one, oneself, etc. Next, the word nato does not mean Lord, but refuge, support, help, protection. Therefore, atta hi atano nato really means one is one's own refuge, or one is one's own help or support. It has nothing to do with any metaphysical soul or self. It simply means that you have to rely on yourself and not on others. Another example of the attempt to introduce the idea of soul into the Buddhist teaching is the well-known words Attadipa Viharata Attasarana Anyanasarana, which are taken out of context in the Mahaparinibbana Sutta. This phrase literally means dwell, making yourself your island, support, making yourself your refuge, and not anyone else as your support. Those who wish to see a self in Buddhism interpret the words Attadipa as Attasarana, taking self as a lamp, taking self as a refuge. We cannot understand the full meaning and significance of the advice of the Buddha to Ananda unless we take into consideration the background and context in which these words were spoken. The Buddha was at the same time studying at a village called Baluva. It was just 3 months before his death, parinirvana. At this time he was 80 years old and was suffering from very serious illness, almost dying. Maranantika. But he thought it was not proper for him to die without breaking it to his disciples who were near and dear to him. So with courage and determination he bore all his pains, got the better of his illness, and recovered. But his health was still poor. After his recovery, he was seated one day in the shade outside his residence. Ananda, the most devoted attendant of the Buddha, went to his beloved master, sat near him, and said, "Sir, I have looked after the health of the Blessed One. I have looked after him in his illness. But at the sight of the illness of the Blessed One, the horizon became dim to me, and my faculties were no longer clear. Yet there was one little consolation. I thought that the Blessed One would not pass away until he had left instructions touching the order of the Sangha." Then the Buddha, full of compassion and human feeling, gently spoke to his devoted and beloved attendant. "Ananda, what does the order of the Sangha expect from me? I have taught the Dhamma without making any distinction as esoteric and esoteric. Without regard to the truth, the Tathagata has nothing like the closed fist of a teacher. Akirya Muti." Surely, Ananda, if there is anyone who thinks that he will lead the Sangha and that the Sangha should depend on him, let him set down his instructions. But the Tathagata has no such idea. Why should he then leave instructions concerning the Sangha? I am now old, Ananda, 80 years old. As a worn-out cart has to be kept going by repairs, so it seems to me the body of the Tathagata can only be kept going by repairs. Therefore, Ananda, dwell making yourselves your island, support, making yourselves, not anyone else, your refuge, making the Dhamma your island, support, the Dhamma your refuge, nothing else your refuge. What the Buddha wanted to convey to Ananda is quite clear. The latter was sad and depressed. He thought that they would all be lonely, helpless, without a refuge, without a leader after their great teacher's death. So the Buddha gave him consolation, courage, and confidence, saying that they should depend on themselves and on the Dhamma he taught, and not on anyone else or on anything else. Here the question of metaphysical Atman or self is quite beside the point. Further, the Buddha explained to Ananda how one could be one's own island or refuge, how one could make Dhamma one's own island or refuge through the cultivation of mindfulness or awareness of the body, sensations, mind and mind objects, the four satipatthanas. There is no talk at all here about an Atman or self. Another reference oft quoted is used by those who try to find Atman in the Buddha's teaching. The Buddha was once seated under a tree in a forest on the way to Uruvela from Benares. On that day, 30 friends, all of them young princes, went out on a picnic with their young wives into the same forest. One of the princes, who was unmarried, brought a prostitute with him. While the others were amusing themselves, she purloined some objects of value and disappeared. In their search for her in the forest, they saw the Buddha seated under a tree and asked him whether he had seen a woman. He inquired what was the matter. When they explained, the Buddha asked them, "What do you think, young men? Which is better for you, to search after a woman or to search after yourselves?" Here again it is a simple and natural question, and there is no justification for introducing far-fetched ideas of a metaphysical Atman or self into the business. They answered that it was better for them to search after themselves. The Buddha then asked them to sit down and explain the Dhamma to them. In the available account, the original text of what he preached to them, not a word is mentioned about an Atman. Much has been written on the subject of the Buddha's silence when a certain Parivrajaka wanderer named Vachagota asked him whether there was an Atman or not. The story is as follows. Vachagota comes to the Buddha and asks, "Venerable Gautama, is there an Atman?" The Buddha is silent. Then, "Venerable Gautama, is there no Atman?" Again the Buddha is silent. Vachagota gets up and goes away. After the Parivrajaka had left, Ananda asks the Buddha why he did not answer Vachagota's question. The Buddha explains his position. "Ananda, when asked by Vachagota the wanderer, 'Is there a self?' If I answered, 'There is a self,' then Ananda, that would be siding with those recluses and Brahmins who hold the eternalist theory, Sasatavada. And Ananda, when asked by the wanderer, 'Is there no self?' If I had answered, there is no self, then that would be siding with those recluses and Brahmins who hold the annihilationist theory, Uchedavada. Again, Ananda, when asked by Vacchagotta, "Is there a self?" If I had answered, "There is a self," would that be in accordance with my knowledge that all Dhammas are without self? Surely not, sir. And again, Ananda, when asked by the wanderer, "Is there no self?" If I had answered, "There is no self," then that would have been a greater confusion to the already confused Vacchagotta, for he would have thought, "Formerly, indeed, I had an Atman self, but now I haven't got one." It should now be quite clear why the Buddha was silent, but it will be still clearer if we take into consideration the whole background and the way the Buddha treated questions and questioners, which is altogether ignored by those who have discussed this problem. The Buddha was not a computing machine giving answers to whatever questions were put to him by anyone at all, without any consideration. He was a practical teacher, full of compassion and wisdom. He did not answer questions to show his knowledge and intelligence, but to help the questioner on the way to realization. He always spoke to people bearing in mind their standard of development, their tendencies, their mental makeup, their character, their capacity to understand a particular question. According to the Buddha, there are 4 ways of treating questions. 1. Some should be answered directly. 2. Others should be answered by way of analyzing them. 3. Yet others should be answered by counter-questions. 4. And lastly, there are questions which should be put aside. There may be several ways of putting aside a question. One is to say that a particular question is not answered or explained, as the Buddha had told this very same Vacchagotta on more than one occasion, when those famous questions, whether the universe is eternal or not, etc., were put to him. In the same way, he had replied to Malunkayaputa and others. But he could not say the same thing with regard to the question whether there is an Atman, self, or not, because he had always discussed and explained it. He could not say there is self because it is contrary to his knowledge that all Dhammas are without self. Then he did not want to say there is no self because that would unnecessarily, without any purpose, have confused and disturbed poor Vacchagotta, who was already confused on a similar question, and he himself admitted earlier. He was not yet in a position to understand the idea of anatta. Therefore, to put aside this question by silence was the wisest thing in this particular case. We must not forget, too, that the Buddha had known Vacchagotta quite well for a long time. This was not the first occasion on which this inquiring wanderer had come to him. The wise and compassionate teacher gave much thought and showed great consideration for this confused seeker. There are many references in the Pali text to this same Vacchagotta the wanderer. He's going round quite often to see the Buddha and his disciples and putting the same kind of question again and again, evidently very much worried, almost obsessed by these questions. The Buddha's silence seems to have had much more of an effect on Vacchagotta than any eloquent answer or discussion. Some people take self to mean what is generally known as mind or consciousness, but the Buddha says that it is better for a man to take his physical body as self rather than mind, thought, or consciousness, because the former seems to be more solid than the latter, because mind, thought or consciousness, ceta, mano, vijnana, changes constantly day and night, even faster than the body, kaya. It is the vague feeling I am that creates the idea of self, which has no corresponding reality, and to see this truth is to realize nirvana, which is not very easy. In the Samyutta Nikaya, there is an enlightening conversation on this point between a bhikkhu named Khemaka and a group of bhikkhus. These bhikkhus ask Khemaka whether he sees in the five aggregates any self or anything pertaining to self. Khemaka replies, no. Then the bhikkhus say that if so, he should be an arahant free from all impurities. But Khemaka confesses that though he does not find in the five aggregates a self or anything pertaining to a self, I am not an arahant free from all impurities. O friends, with regard to the five aggregates of attachment, I have a feeling I am, but I do not clearly see this is I am. Then Khemaka explains that what he calls I am is neither matter, sensation, perception, mental formations, nor consciousness, nor anything without them. But he has the feeling I am with regard to the five aggregates, though he could not see clearly this is I am. He said it is like the smell of a flower. It is neither the smell of the petals, nor the color, nor of the pollen, but the smell of the flower. Khemaka further explains that even a person who has attained the early stages of realization still retains this feeling, I am. But later on, when he progresses further, this feeling of I am altogether disappears, just as the chemical smell of a freshly washed cloth disappears after time when it is kept in a box. This discussion was so useful and enlightening to them that at the end of it, the text says, all of them, including Khemaka himself, became arahants, free from all impurities, thus finally getting rid of I am. According to the Buddhist teaching, it is wrong to hold the opinion I have no self, which is the annihilationist theory, as to hold the opinion I have self, which is the eternalist theory. Because both are fetters, both arising out of the false idea I am. The correct position with regard to the question of anatta is not to take hold of any opinions or views, but to try to see things objectively as they are without mental projections, to see that what we call I or being is only a combination of physical and mental aggregates, which are working together interdependently in a flux of momentary change within the law of cause and effect, and that there is nothing permanent, everlasting, unchanging, and eternal in the whole of existence. Here naturally a question arises. If there is no Atman or self, who gets the results of karma, actions? No one can answer this question better than the Buddha himself. When this question was raised by a bhikkhu, the Buddha said, I have taught you, O bhikkhus, to see conditionality everywhere in all things. The Buddha's teaching on anatta, no soul or no self, should not be considered as negative or annihilistic. Like nirvana, it is truth, reality, and reality cannot be negative. It is the false belief in non-existing imaginary self that is negative. The teaching of anatta dispels the darkness of false beliefs and produces the light of wisdom, It is not negative, as the Sangha very aptly says. There is the fact of no selfness. Chapter 7. Meditation or Mental Culture, Bhavana. The Buddha said, "O bhikkhus, there are two kinds of illness. What are these two? Physical illness and mental illness. There seem to be people who enjoy freedom from physical illness even for a year or two, even for 100 years or more. But, O bhikkhus, rare in this world are those who enjoy freedom from mental illness even for one moment, except for those who are free from mental defilements, i.e. except arahants." The Buddhist teaching, particularly his way of meditation, aims at producing a state of perfect mental health, equilibrium, and tranquility. It is unfortunate that hardly any other section of the Buddha's teaching is so much misunderstood as meditation, both by Buddhists and non-Buddhists. The moment the word meditation is mentioned, one thinks of an escape from the daily activities of life, assuming a particular posture like a statue in some cave or cell in a monastery in some remote place cut off from society, and musing on or being absorbed in some kind of mystic or mysterious thought or trance. True Buddhist meditation does not mean this kind of escape at all. The Buddhist teaching on this subject was so wrongly or so little understood that in later times the way of meditation deteriorated and degenerated into a kind of ritual or ceremony almost technical in its routine. Most people are interested in meditation or yoga in order to gain some spiritual or mystic powers, like the third eye, which others do not possess. There was some time ago a Buddhist nun in India who was trying to develop a power to see through her ears, while she was still in possession of the power of perfect eyesight. This kind of idea is nothing but spiritual perversion. It is always a question of desire, thirst for power. The word meditation is a very poor substitute for the original term bhavana, which means culture or development, i.e. mental culture or mental development. The Buddhist bhavana, properly speaking, is mental culture in the full sense of the term. It aims at cleansing the mind of impurities and disturbances, such as lustful desires, hatred, ill will, indolence, worries, and restlessness, skeptical doubts, and cultivating such qualities as concentration, awareness, intelligence, will, energy, the analytical faculty, confidence, joy, tranquility, leading finally to the attainment of highest wisdom, which sees the nature of things as they really are and realizes the ultimate truth, nirvana. There are two forms of meditation. One is the development of mental concentration, samatha or samadhi, of one-pointedness of mind, ekagata, by various methods prescribed in the text leading up to the highest mystic states, such as the sphere of nothingness or the sphere of neither perception nor non-perception. All these mystic states, according to the Buddha, are mind-created, mind-produced, conditioned, samkhata. They have nothing to do with reality, truth, nirvana. This form of meditation existed before the Buddha. Hence, it is not purely Buddhist, but it is not excluded from the field of Buddhist meditation. However, it is not essential for the realization of nirvana. The Buddha himself, before his enlightenment, studied these yogic practices under different teachers and attained to the highest mystic states. But he was not satisfied with them because they did not give complete liberation. They did not give insight into the ultimate reality. He considered these mystic states only as happy living in this existence, or peaceful living. and nothing more. He therefore discovered the other form of meditation known as vipassana. Insight into the nature of things, leading to the complete liberation of mind, to the realization of the ultimate truth, nirvana. This is essentially Buddhist meditation, Buddhist mental culture. It is an analytical method based on mindfulness, awareness, vigilance, and observation. It is impossible to do justice to such a vast subject in a few pages. However, an attempt is made here to give a very brief and rough idea of the true Buddhist meditation, mental culture, or mental development in a practical way. The most important discourse ever given by the Buddha on mental development meditation is called Satipatthana Sutta, the setting up of mindfulness, number 22 of the Digha Nikaya, or number 10 of the Majjhima Nikaya. This discourse is so highly venerated in tradition that it is regularly recited not only in Buddhist monasteries but also in Buddhist homes, with members of the family sitting around and listening with deep devotion. Very often bhikkhus recite the sutta by the bedside of a dying man to purify his last thoughts. The ways of meditation given in the discourse are not cut off from life, nor do they avoid life. On the contrary, they are all connected with our life, our daily activities, our sorrows and joys, our words and thoughts, our moral, intellectual occupations. The discourse is divided into 4 main sections. The first section deals with our body, kaya, the second with our feelings and sensations, vedana, the third with the mind, citta, and the fourth with various moral and intellectual subjects, Dhamma. It should be clearly borne in mind that whatever the form of meditation may be, the essential thing is mindfulness or awareness, sati, attention or observation, anupassana. One of the most well-known, popular, and practical examples of meditation connected with the body is called the mindfulness or awareness of in and out breathing, anapanasati. It is for this meditation only that a particular and definite posture is prescribed in the text. For other forms of meditation given in this sutta, you may sit, stand, walk, or lie down as you like. But for cultivating mindfulness of in-out breathing, one should sit, according to the text, cross-legged, keeping the body erect and mindfulness alert. But sitting cross-legged is not practical and easy for people of all countries, particularly for Westerners. Therefore, those who find it difficult to sit cross-legged may sit on a chair, keeping the body erect and mindfulness alert. It is very necessary for this exercise that the meditator should sit erect, but not stiff. His hands placed comfortably on his lap. Thus seated, you may close your eyes, or you may gaze at the tip of your nose, as it may be convenient to you. You breathe in and out all day and night, but you are never mindful of it. You never for a second concentrate your mind on it. Now you are going to do just this. Breathe in and out as usual, without any effort or strain. Now bring your mind to concentrate on your breathing in and breathing out. Let your mind watch and observe your breathing in and out. Let your mind be aware and vigilant of your breathing in and out. When you breathe, you sometimes take deep breaths, sometimes not. This does not matter at all. Breathe normally and naturally. The only thing is that when you take deep breaths, you should be aware that they are deep breaths, and so on. In other words, your mind should be so fully concentrated on your breathing that you are aware of its movements and changes. Forget all other things, your surroundings, your environment. Do not raise your eyes and look at anything. Try to do this for 5 or 10 minutes. At the beginning, you will find it extremely difficult to bring your mind to concentrate on your breathing. You will be astonished how your mind runs away. It does not stay. You begin to think of various things. You hear sounds outside. Your mind is disturbed and distracted. You may be dismayed and disappointed, but if you continue to practice this exercise twice daily, morning and evening, for about 5 or 10 minutes at a time, you will gradually, by and by, begin to concentrate your mind on your breathing. After a certain period, you will experience just that split second when your mind is fully concentrated on your breathing, when you will not hear even sounds nearby, when no external world exists for you. This slight moment is such a tremendous experience for you, full of joy, happiness, and tranquility, that you would like to continue it. But still you cannot. Yet if you go on practicing this regularly, you may repeat the experience again and again for longer and longer periods. This is the moment when you lose yourself completely in your mindfulness of breathing. As long as you are conscious of yourself, you can never concentrate on anything. This exercise of mindfulness of breathing, which is one of the simplest and easiest practices, is meant to develop concentration leading up to very high mystic attainments, dhyana. Besides, the power of concentration is essential for any kind of deep understanding, penetration, insight into the nature of things, including the realization of nirvana. Apart from this exercise on breathing gives you immediate results. It is good for your physical health, for relaxation, sound sleep, and for efficiency in your daily work. It makes you calm and tranquil. Even at moments when you are nervous or excited, if you practice this for a couple of minutes, you will see for yourself that you become immediately quiet and at peace. You feel as if you have awakened after a good rest. Another very important practical and useful form of meditation, mental development, is to be aware and mindful of whatever you do, physically or verbally, during the daily routine of work in your life, private, public, or professional. Whether you walk, stand, sit, lie down, or sleep, whether you stretch or bend your legs, whether you look around, whether you put on your clothes, whether you talk or keep silence, whether you eat or drink, even whether you answer the calls of nature. In these and other activities, you should be fully aware and mindful of the act you perform at the moment. That is to say that you should live in the present moment, in the present action. This does not mean that you should not think of the past or the future at all. On the contrary, you think of them in relation to the present moment, the present action, when and where it is relevant. People do not generally live in their actions in the present moment. They live in the past or in the future. Though they seem to be doing something now, here, they live somewhere else in their thoughts, in their imagination, in their imaginary problems and worries, usually in the memories of the past or in the desires and speculations about the future. Therefore, they do not live in, nor do they enjoy what they do at the moment. So they are unhappy and discontented with the present moment, with the work at hand, and naturally they cannot give themselves fully to what they appear to be doing. Sometimes you see a man in a restaurant reading while eating, a very common sight. He gives you the impression of being a very busy man with no time even for eating. You wonder whether he eats or reads. One may say that he does both. In fact, he does neither. He enjoys neither. He is strained and disturbed in mind. And he does not enjoy what he does at the moment, does not live his life in the present moment, but unconsciously and foolishly tries to escape from life. This does not mean, however, that one should not talk with a friend while having lunch or dinner. You cannot escape life however you may try. As long as you live, whether in town or in a cave, you have to face it and live it. Real life is the present moment, not the memories of the past which is dead and gone, nor the dreams of the future which is not yet born. One who lives in the present moment lives the real life, and he is happiest. When asked why his disciples, who lived a simple and quiet life with only one meal a day, were so radiant, the Buddha replied, "They do not repent the past, nor do they brood over the future. They live in the present. Therefore they are radiant. By brooding over the future and repenting the past, fools dry up like green reeds cut down in the sun." Mindfulness or awareness does not mean that you should think and be conscious, "I am doing this, I am doing that." No, just the contrary. The moment you think, "I am doing this," you become self-conscious. And then you do not live in the action, but you live in the idea, "I am." And consequently your work, too, is spoiled. You should forget yourself completely and lose yourself in what you do. The moment a speaker becomes self-conscious and thinks, "I am addressing an audience," his speech is disturbed and his trend of thought broken. But when he forgets himself in his speech, in his subject, then he is at his best. He speaks well and explains things clearly. All great work, artistic, poetic, intellectual, or spiritual, is produced at those moments when its creators are lost completely in their actions, when they forget themselves altogether and are free from self-consciousness. This mindfulness or awareness with regard to our activities taught by the Buddha is to live in the present moment, to live in the present action. This is also the Zen way. This is also the Zen way, which is based primarily upon this teaching. Here in this form of meditation, you haven't got to perform any particular action in order to develop mindfulness, but you have only to be mindful and aware of whatever you do. You haven't got to spend 1 second of your precious time on this particular meditation. You have only to cultivate mindfulness and awareness always, day and night, with regard to all activities in your usual daily life. These two forms of meditation discussed above are connected with our body. Then there is a way of practicing mental development meditation with regard to all our sensations or feelings, whether happy, unhappy, or neutral. Let us take one example. You experience an unhappy, sorrowful sensation. In this state, your mind is cloudy, hazy, not clear, it is depressed. In some cases, you do not even see clearly why you have that unhappy feeling. First of all, you should not learn not to be unhappy about your unhappy feeling, not to be worried about your worries, but try to see clearly why there is a sensation or a feeling of unhappiness or worry or sorrow. Try to examine how it arises, its cause, how it disappears, its cessation. Try to examine it as if you are observing it from outside, without any subjective reaction, as a scientist observes some object. Here too, you should not look at it as my feeling or my sensation subjectively, but only look at it as a feeling or a sensation objectively. You should forget again the false idea of I. When you see its nature, how it arises and disappears, your mind grows dispassionate towards that sensation and becomes detached and free. It is the same with regard to all sensations or feelings. Now let us discuss the form of meditation with regard to our minds. You should be fully aware of the fact whenever your mind is passionate or detached, whenever it is overwhelmed by hatred, ill will, jealousy, or is full of love, compassion, whenever it is deluded or has a clear and right understanding, and so on and so forth. We must admit that very often we are afraid or ashamed to look at our own minds, so we prefer to avoid it. One should be bold and sincere and look at one's own mind as one looks at one's face in a mirror. Here is no attitude of criticizing or judging or discriminating between right and wrong or good and bad. It is simply observing, watching, examining. You are not a judge but a scientist. When you observe your mind and see its true nature clearly, you become dispassionate with regard to its emotions, sentiments, and states. Thus you become detached and free, so that you may see things as they are. Let us take one example. Say you are really angry, overpowered by anger, ill will, and hatred. It is curious and paradoxical that the man who is in anger is not really aware, not mindful, and he is not mindful that he is angry. The moment he becomes aware and mindful of that state of his mind, the moment he sees his anger, it becomes as if it were shy and ashamed, and begins to subside. You should examine its nature, how it arises, how it disappears. Here again it should be remembered that you should not think, I am angry, or of my anger. You should only be aware and mindful of the state of an angry mind. You are only observing and examining an angry mind objectively. This should be the attitude with regard to all sentiments, emotions, and states of mind. Then there is a form of meditation on ethical, spiritual, and intellectual subjects. All our studies, readings, discussions, conversation, and deliberations on such subjects are included in this meditation. To read this book and to think deeply about the subjects discussed in it is a form of meditation. We have seen earlier that the conversation between Kemaka and the group of monks was a form of meditation which led to the realization of nirvana. So, according to this form of meditation, you may study, think, and deliberate on the 5 hindrances, nirvana, namely lustful desires, kamachanda, ill will, hatred or anger, vyapada, torpor and languor, tinamida, restlessness and worry, udacha, kukucha, skeptical doubts, vichikicha. These 5 are considered as hindrances to any kind of clear understanding, as a matter of fact, to any kind of progress. When one is overpowered by them, and when one does not know how to get rid of them, then one cannot understand right and wrong, or good and bad. One may also meditate on the 7 factors of enlightenment, bojjhanga. They are: 1. Mindfulness, sati, i.e. to be aware and mindful in all activities and movements, both physical and mental, as we discussed above. 2. Investigation and research into the various problems of doctrine, Dhamma, Vichaya. Included here are all our religious, ethical, and philosophical studies, reading, researches, discussions, conversation, even attending lectures related to such doctrinal subjects. Energy, virya, to work with determination till the end. Joy, piti, the quality quite contrary to the pessimistic, gloomy, or melancholic attitude of mind. Relaxation, passaddhi, of both mind and body. One should not be stiff physically or mentally. Concentration, samadhi, as discussed above. Equanimity, upekkha, i.e. to be able to face life in its vicissitudes with calm mind, tranquility, without disturbance. To cultivate these qualities, the most essential thing is a genuine wish, will, or inclination. Many other material and spiritual conditions conducive to the development of each quality are described in the texts. One may also meditate on such subjects as the 5 aggregates investigating the question, what is a being, or what is it that is called I, or on the 4 Noble Truths as discussed above. Study and investigation of those subjects constitute this 4th form of meditation, which leads to the realization of ultimate truth. Apart from those we have discussed here, there are many other subjects of meditation, traditionally 40 in number, among which mention should be made, particularly of the 4 sublime states. Brahma Vihara, 1. Extending unlimited universal love and goodwill, or metta, to all living beings without any kind of discrimination, just as a mother loves her only child. 2. Compassion, or karuna, for all living beings who are suffering, in trouble, and affliction, or afflicted. 3. Sympathetic joy, mudita, sympathetic joy in others' success, welfare, and happiness. And 4. Equanimity, or upekkha, in all vicissitudes of life.